KC Oster, illustrator of Rabbit Chase, and you're listening to the True North Country Comics podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swenimer. If you want to drop me a line, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. On this episode, I chat with KC Oster about the middle grade graphic novel entitled Rabbit Chase. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. It's also available on the True North Country Comics channel on YouTube. I invite you to like and subscribe. KC is an Ojibwe Anishinaabe comic artist and freelance illustrator based in the Rainy River District of northeastern Ontario. KC has illustrated children's books, graphics novels, as well as creating an ongoing web-based comics, often centered around Indigenous characters. KC has a desire to create exciting characters that Indigenous youth can see and relate to. When the busy day doesn't involve drawing or exploring characters and ideas, KC can often be found studying and learning about different histories, languages, and cultures. KC illustrated the recently published middle-grade graphic novel Rabbit Chase, written by Elizabeth Lapensee. The story of Rabbit Chase from Anik Press goes like this. Amy, a non-binary Anishinaabe middle schooler, is on a class trip to offer gifts to Pinshank, the water spirits known to protect the land. While stories are told about the water spirits and the threat of the land being taken over for development, Amy zones out, distracting themselves from the bullying and isolation they've experienced since expressing their non-binary identity. When Amy accidentally wanders off, they are transported to an alternate dimension populated by traditional Anishinaabe figures in a story inspired by Alice in Wonderland. To gain the way back home, Amy is called on to help Trickster by hunting down dark water spirits with guidance from Pinshank. On their journey, Amy faces off with the land-grabbing queen and her robotic guards and fights the dark water spirits against increasingly stacked odds. And so, without further ado, here's my chat with KC Oster about the middle-grade graphic novel entitled Rabbit Chase. So KC Oster, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for inviting me.
I appreciate your time. Before we get started, though, I want to ask you if you remember what was the first comic book that you read?
Gosh, I guess like the first comic books, like just in general, I used to read a lot of the Archie comics when I was a kid. And, like Garfield and like those kind of comics. I think when I got to about grade, I want to say about 5 or 6, I actually started discovering things like, anime and manga. And so that was about the age when I started reading Japanese mangas. And I believe Vampire Knight was like the first one of those that I read.
Very good. Well, those are definitely good books growing up. But I'm wondering who or what inspires you to create today?
There's so many people and just lots of things inspire me. Quite a few people online that I follow. There's some artists from the past, like the legendary Vincent van Gogh. I find inspiration in so many different places. I guess it's really hard to pinpoint just a few, Sure. I understand. So I came across your name. I was reading a CBC Books article entitled 12 Middle Grade and YA Books to Escape into the Summer. And that's why I found out about you and your latest book called Rabbit Chase that you illustrated with author Elizabeth Lapensee. So I wanted to ask you about that book. Can you tell me a little bit about the story and maybe what inspired you to illustrate it? So Rabbit Chase, I guess you could say it's a Alice in Wonderland sort of story with an Anishinaabe twist to it. The main character, Amy, is a non-binary Anishinaabe kid who is sort of having trouble figuring out sort of their place in the world. And because of that, they struggle to connect with other kids and figuring out who they are with their identity and all of that is a real struggle for them, especially at that age. And then during a class trip, they end up in another world, totally by accident, and they're pretty caught off guard and not really having it at first. And then they start to meet the different characters of that world, one of which is actually the famous, well-known trickster hero Nanabuju and his brother Jibayabus. And so they help each other figure things out in this new land, in this new world, and sort of helps Amy figure themselves out along the way. So it's a really bright, colorful, fun sort of take on a classic story with some Anishinaabe cultural influence as well.
Right. Was there one element that sort of inspired you, said, yeah, I definitely want to do it because of this particular thing?
Absolutely the Alice in Wonderland aspect to it. I've always loved Alice in Wonderland, like the original books, the Disney animation, all the different adaptations that I've seen over the years. I always found the story and the content just super mesmerizing and interesting. So I was really excited by the idea of getting to sort of make my own little twists to that whole world.
Cool. Now, we mentioned the author's name, Elizabeth, before. Can you talk about the creative process and working with her? Can you describe a little bit of that?
Mm-hmm. Elizabeth was really, really great to work with. We were like, right from the beginning, we were basically on the same page. So it was really easy to kind of communicate our different thoughts and ideas for the story and how we wanted it to turn out. So Elizabeth actually had the manuscript already written out, all the dialogue and everything, and she actually wrote down some notes for me, some ideas of like what she wanted to see for the panels, like what the characters were going to be doing, sort of the camera angles even. And so I sort of took those and scribbled them out, and then I made my own edits just to kind of give it my own sort of view on it, and just a little bit of back and forth, but for the most part we were pretty much on the same page, so there wasn't a whole lot of edits to do, thankfully.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I'm glad it worked out for sure. I also want to ask you if your work as a tour guide and cultural interpreter prepared you in any way for this book.
I think so, a little bit. My past work as a cultural interpreter and tour guide at the Kenatuanang Historical Center, it really opened me up to the cultural and history stuff with the Anishinaabe culture. And, you know, it really opened a lot of doors for me to understand a lot more than I would have before that job. And so after working there for a few years and then getting this job for illustration, I was actually able to, the moment where Amy is like on her little school trip, it kind of reminded me a lot of like the kids that I would actually take on tours a lot. You know, some of them would just kind of be on their phone, not really paying attention. And so I mean, I knew how that was, how that looked, how they acted. So that helped in that aspect, but also obviously the cultural side of it as well. Just having that close connection, I guess.
Right. Well, I want to switch gears a wee bit here and talk about the tools used to create your art. I was watching, there was one of the CBC documentaries about you. You were sitting in a field, and I think you were using an iPad, I think, if I'm correct. But maybe if you could talk a wee bit about what tools you use to create your art.
Mm-hmm. So obviously, like you said, I do use an iPad Pro with the Apple Pencil, and I use for that usually I use the Procreate app. And then when I'm at home working on my desktop computer, I usually use a Wacom tablet, and I'll actually do a lot of my comic work on Clip Studio Paint. It has a lot of features on there that are perfect for people who work with comic books and that sort of media.
Right. As referring back to this CBC video that I watched, you were literally sitting in a field doing your drawing. So I'm wondering, do you draw inspiration from you're in northeastern Ontario? Do you draw sort of inspiration from your surroundings as well, from nature?
Oh, absolutely. A lot of my inspiration comes from the nature, the people, my experiences, and just sort of everything around me. Things I do, things I see, hear. Yeah, so I'm almost always, almost always have something on me wherever I go, so I can draw the moment inspiration hits me, wherever that comes from.
It might not necessarily be an iPad Pro, because that is a little bit bigger than
Yeah.
typical books. But from what I gather, you have usually a notebook on you, some sort of drawing implement.
Oh yeah, definitely. Anything I can get my hands on usually. My bags usually will contain like a small sketchbook or notepad or something, and then a couple different pens.
And then when you get back to your desktop, your office scenario, that's when do you scan, or you just replicate that when you're on your iPad Pro?
When I'm on my iPad or on my computer, I don't really scan. I don't really have a scanner, but I do sort of just kind of copy what I see. If I really like how the sketch turned out on like the paper, I might just like take a photo of it with my phone or something, and then send it to myself so I can then put it onto whichever software that I'm using.
Right. Very good. Very good. Now, we were talking about your book. It was mentioned in the CBC Books article. I'm wondering, do you have any plans to promote your book this year? Will you be attending any conventions or festivals?
At the moment, I don't have any plans for that. I have done a couple talks with other artists, and like little promotional things online with different like libraries and school boards. But for the moment, I don't have anything planned. But I mean, if someone comes up, I might be willing to.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. Well, we've talked about your book, Rabbit Chase. I'm wondering if you have any other up and coming projects that you can talk about.
I have one that I've just started. I can't really talk about it, but I am working on something.
Great.
But I did also recently contribute to a like a zine or zine. I'm not even too sure how to pronounce that, but it's an anthology, collection of different comics from different Native artists and writers who did a bunch of stories, kind of like about werewolves and werewolves and wolves. Sorry.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah. So I have a short 4-page comic in there as well, and it's called A Howl.
Ah, very good. Where can people find that, do you think?
Red Planet Comics, I believe, is the site that is selling it. They're also the publishers. And Elizabeth actually helped organize that as well.
Nice. Very good. Well, is there a website or social media you recommend people go to find out more about your current and your future projects?
Yeah. So my website is kcpause.com. So it's the letters KC and then pause, PAWZ .com. And there I'll I usually have a small portfolio, some like a list of different projects that I've worked on and links to check them out, as well as all of my social media and contact.
Very good. Well, Casey, those are all the questions I have for you, but I'm wondering, is there something I didn't ask that you'd like to get across in this interview?
Well, other than my work with like the graphic novel Rabbit Chase and some other like children's book illustrations that I've done and am working on, I am hoping to eventually work on my own comics. I have in the past done a couple web comics. Like I've started them, then life got in the way, and then I had to kind of put them on pause and all that. But I've actually done a lot of work in the past few years developing these stories and characters, and I'm hoping within the next year or two I can actually share them with the world again. And every now and then on my social media, I'll actually like share these characters and bits of their stories. So if you want to check those out, you can always find me on Instagram or Twitter. Same handle, KC Pause, spelled the same way as my website.
Thanks to KC for taking time to chat with me. You can discover more about KC on Twitter and Instagram at KCPAWZ and online at kcpause.com. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts. And please leave a good rating. Also check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow along on Twitter at True North Comics. True North Country Comics is now on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel and hit the notification button. Please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2022.